You know, for a book that single-handedly saved the Goosebumps franchise from ending because of the word-of-mouth popularity that it accumulated, and a Goosebumps enemy and villain that ended up becoming one of the most infamous villains of all time and one of the toughest people to kill and the toughest enemies to beat, I got a real easy way to deal with this book, all right? You don't even need to read the 120 or so pages of this book. This is how you defeat the villain, all right? You take this, put both hands around it, pat it up, and Slappy's defeated. You don't even have to worry about the shenanigans involving this book. Just take one of these and bonk that. Just put me in a Goosebumps book. I could solve that thing in about 5 minutes, all right? But no, I got to sit here and I got to review for 12 minutes about the struggles that two twin girls dealt with regarding this dummy, all right? Makes you question who the real dummy is, all right? You didn't like that joke. Don't tune off, though, because this is an important review in the Goosebumps series. Because this is the first time that I have read Night of the Living Dummy after a long time, because I did read this book as a kid. I'm going to be reviewing Night of the Living Dummy 1, which is arguably the most important Goosebumps book in the series, not only because at that time it helped revive Goosebumps' popularity and kind of save it from getting canceled, but also it sparked, as many of you may know, the overabundance of Slappy books and Slappy stories that would come, because Slappy would end up becoming one of the most popular villains in all of Goosebumps history. And yeah, he's basically now the mascot of Goosebumps. So this is a very important book. So without further ado, let's get into the review of Night of the Living Dummy. So yeah, if you like this video, feel free to subscribe down below, like the video, and comment as well. When you comment down below, let me know your thoughts and opinions as to whether you really love this book, as to whether you didn't like this book, or maybe you agree with me in that you think it's good for what it is, and it's a decent and fun read. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm going to be talking about Night of the Living Dummy 1, and for those who don't know the plot of the book, let's get into a brief plot synopsis. So the book revolves around, I believe her name is Chris, and it's Chris and Lindy. So Chris and Lindy are a pair of 12-year-old twins, and basically they're always arguing and bickering with each other. They always fight, they always have competitions with one another, and one day, as they're out in the backyard because their parents are sick of their arguing and they tell them to go take a hike, they head out to the backyard and there's a new house that's being built by theirs. And they go to check it out as it's still in construction. And as they head into the house, they hear noises. You get this really creepy scene of like, they may or may not hear footsteps. They don't know who the footsteps belong to. And after they run out, it turns out to be a false alarm. But Lindy ends up finding this ventriloquist dummy that got thrown away in the trash. And he has a gray suit, he's got short black hair, he's got a white t-shirt painted on, and he's got these beautiful blue eyes, and they seem to be looking right into yours every time you take a look at the dummy. And it turns out that this is going to be the infamous dummy that would end up being in a Goosebumps series, Slappy, as Lindy gives that nickname to him. And because she finds Slappy, she decides to take on ventriloquism, because she thinks she has a natural talent at it, which obviously makes Chris jealous. You know, she thinks she's trying to be a show-off. And as Lindy starts practicing with Slappy, she ends up becoming really good at ventriloquism, and it ends up gigging her shows. She ends up doing shows for kids. She realizes that kids really love Slappy, and they love Slappy doing these jokes and doing these acts. So she ends up becoming popular around the neighborhood, and even ends up getting paid for her to show up to birthday parties and to perform with them. And this in turn makes Chris very jealous. And Chris decides, you know what, I want a dummy. All right, she's getting all the popularity. I think I can be just as good of a ventriloquist as she can be. All right, so she keeps begging her dad. And then in the book, in the first half, you know, it kind of sets the atmosphere for Slappy, right? Because there's scenes where they'll be sleeping at night, and she'll have, Lindy will put Slappy on the chair sitting there, and Chris obviously will be sometimes looking at Slappy, and she'll feel as though Slappy's staring right back at her, and she has this creepy feeling about, like, you know, what's up with this thing? How come every time I go up to it, it feels like its eyes are tracking me? It feels like its eyes are looking directly into my soul. So she gets uncomfortable, and it could be from a point of jealousy. It could be, a point from obviously kids being scared. So eventually, after some convincing, her dad does getting her a ventriloquist dummy named Mr. Wood. And Mr. Wood has red hair. He wears flannel. He wears jeans. He's got white high top sneakers. And he's going to be Chris's new ventriloquist dummy. And she ends up basically trying to do acts with him, trying to perform, and she's not as naturally good as Lindy is. So she has trouble. Lindy gives her a hard time, saying, "Oh, you just want to copy me. You just want to do exactly what I want to do." And they start fighting amongst each other. It makes the parents even more angry at them, more mad at them. And now they're getting more creepy feelings, even towards the dummy themselves, because there are points in the book where, they'll wake up, and even though they put the two dummies aside from each other, one day they wake up and Mr. Wood has his hands around Slappy's throat as if he's choking him. And Chris and Lindy are like, we didn't set up, we didn't do that. They're like, no, neither one of us did that. So how did that happen? They think that there's hints that, they might be moving around. There might be more of these dummies than we think. And obviously, because Lindy's been getting all this popularity, Chris eventually does get her break, and she ends up getting assigned for a talent show at her local school. So that's going to be upcoming, and she has to practice. But with all this crazy stuff happening around the house and all this bickering, it's becoming really, really difficult for her. And you end up getting this, I guess, climax twist halfway through the book, where it's basically extremely shoehorned in as to what could be the cause of all these things happening. And once it's revealed, you kind of have this sense of ease. You have this sense of like, all right, we kind of get what's happening. We figure out some more about what a character was planning. So, all right, we can kind of relax a bit. But then Chris finds a piece of paper in Mr. Wood's clothing, and it reads this in this foreign language. It's this sentence that's written in a foreign language, and she reads it out, and as soon as she reads it out, she swears that Mr. Wood ended up winking at her or moving his eyes as soon as she read out those words, and she's convinced. She's like, what? No, I swear he did. I swear he did it. And it becomes a matter of, you gotta believe me, where now crazy stuff is happening in the house, and let's just say there's a lot more merit to it actually being the dummies that might be causing this trouble. And as the stuff's happening, the twins are getting blamed for it. They swear that it's not them. Their parents don't believe them. Their friends don't believe them. And then it gets to the talent show, and the talent show's a complete disaster. Mr. Wood ends up insulting the teacher, calling her fat, calling her all these names, and then he ends up projectile vomiting all over the crowd. And they all freak out, and she ends up getting suspended from school. Her parents are really pissed off at them. And then you get to the climax of the book, which happens at night, where basically they may or may not catch Mr. Wood in the act, and they have to try to get rid of Mr. Wood in order to solve the problem. So yeah, that's basically the plot of this book, and there's also a twist ending, which essentially is a little nod to what would come in the future of the Night of the Living Dummy series. So yeah, that's a synopsis of this book. What are some of the positives and negatives involved in this book? So in terms of the positives, this book is extremely creepy. It has a lot of creepy and really disturbing moments in this book, just for how they invoke feelings within you. Because there's scenes in the beginning of the book, which even though they become basically null and void, there's scenes where, Chris will be in her bed and she's got the covers on her and she's sleeping, and she'll look over and it really, it feels like Slappy is looking right at her as she's sleeping. And that's horrifying. That's like some sleep paralysis demon stuff, man. Like if I had to sleep in a room with this ventriloquist dummy and I think that it's staring at me and looking at me right into my soul, and its eyes have this weird sort of reflection in it, because in the beginning of the book, she talks about how the moonlight is pouring in through the window and it has this kind of gleam over his eyes, and they look like they're alive. The eyes look like they have life behind them, and it's terrifying, man. It's some really haunting stuff. And even in terms of them hearing noises at night, them waking up to the dummies in weird positions, is really creepy, thinking that this toy could be moving around. It could be alive. It could be watching you. You have to sleep in the same room as this thing. It's all really, really creepy. And the climax to the book, where they may or may not catch the Mr. Wood in the act, and what may actually be going on involving the stuff around the house, that was really intense, because not only was it creepy to hear the description of it happening, but in that struggle between what happens, the trouble that it causes, their solution to it, that solution not ending up well, and then animal abuse even getting involved in the book. All that stuff leads up to a very intense and very climactic, basically lead up to the book. And it's an amazing climax. It's pretty damn good, if I had to say so. It's really intense, and it's a good struggle between the villain and the protagonist of the story. And yeah, I think this book is pretty fun. I think it's creepy. I think it's fun. I think obviously the dummies hearing Mr. Wood do his stuff is pretty funny. Seeing him do shenanigans, seeing him insult people. I mean, that's what we usually love about the Night of the Living Dummy books, the fact that Slappy's got a lot of personality, and the dummies, the Night of the Living Dummies, usually have the jokes, comedy, wit. They cause a lot of shenanigans. But at the same time, when they're quiet and they're plotting and they're doing stuff, it's described in such a horrifying and creepy way. But for the negatives about this book, I think the biggest negative about this book is the basically shoehorned reveal that happens about halfway through the book, where you basically realize that the stuff that you attributed towards certain things are not at all related to that. It's related to something that a specific character was doing. And when that character reveals that they were the one behind all these shenanigans and things going on, you really sort of just like kind of just cringe. You're just like, that's a really shoehorned villain moment that just sort of threw in there just to make that character more dislikable. I mean these the characters that you're dealing with are already not likable, and yet when that moment happens, you're like, wow, this makes it even worse. It just shoehorned in there for me to hate that person even more. And it's really just sort of a malicious act to do. And there's not a good reasoning as to why it happens. It's just sort of explained up to personal emotions and jealousy more than an actual reasoning or planning, which is funny because there's not a big motivation behind it, yet the amount of planning and stuff that happened as a result of that character was pretty well thought out and planned. So that's a bit contradicting, and I did not like that. It's sort of, I think as Goosebumps completion to put, I watched his review, sort of does a soft reset for the book. Another main weakness about this book is the protagonists. Lindy and Chris argue a lot. They are obnoxious. They argue nonstop. They bicker over everything. They complain. They whine. It makes you feel like the parents. You're like, yo, I understand why the parents feel as they do, because these kids are absolutely annoying. And it's really ridiculous to sit there and deal with them always having to fight, always having to find something to argue about. And they very rarely, if ever, find a chance to agree with one another. So you'll have a bit of difficulty getting through the book if you hate that sort of, annoying sibling relationship. It's ever so present in this book. And I think another, I guess, weakness, but it's not that big of a deal inherently, is the fact that obviously Slappy is the main cover of this book. His driver's license photo is right there in the cover of the book. And yet Slappy does not hold pretty much any relevance to the book. He is not at all the main villain of this book, if at all a villain at all. He's not even that important if you had to really look down to the foundation of the story, aside from driving the plot. Mr. Wood is the main villain and the main culprit behind a lot of the shenanigans that go on and a lot of the climactic stuff that happens in the book. And really it does not set up for anything. Now, the twist ending may or may not have to involve maybe potentially Slappy, but overall the book, it's not, Slappy's not a crucial part of this book, even though it's advertised as Slappy being the most important thing and starts off the book with Slappy. So I think the major weakness to this book is the fact that, Slappy's not the main villain. And it Mr. Wood does have a great climax. He does his job. Mr. Wood does his thing for a one-off character that never appears again in Goosebumps, as far as I'm concerned. Um, but he does his thing, but I feel like it'd have been better if it focused on Slappy. And after reading Night of the Living Dummy 2, I have to agree in thinking that I really loved Night of the Living Dummy 2, and I think Night of the Living Dummy 2 should have been the first book. I think if Night of the Living Dummy 2 was the first book instead, it would have helped out the series a lot more and made it more Slappy driven off the rip. But obviously, I can't say much because this book did help Goosebumps from getting canceled, and it was very popular, so it ended up working out. But that's my own personal take towards it. Despite those negatives about the book, there's also not a negative, not a positive, just sort of a thing. I acknowledge that in regards to the twist ending, you realize that a certain character has been holding in certain things that they could have done for the entirety of the book, and because somebody may or may not have said something out loud earlier in the book that was never talked about, never discussed, never shown, and then the ending of the book kind of reveals that, yeah, there was more going on behind the scenes. So that's sort of another thing about this, the aspect of this book, in that there is things that happen off screen that you will not see. So just keep that in mind. So yeah, how do I rate this book? I would give this book, honestly, probably, I used to say like 7 out of 10. I might bump it up to maybe like 7.3, 7.5 out of 10. I think I enjoyed this book. This book is like textbook average to decent to me. I gave it a 7 out of 10 initially, but maybe because of what, after a little bit of the book, I might give it a 7.2, 7.3. I think this is a textbook definition of a good / decent Goosebumps book. And I think you'll have a fun time with it. I think this is a fun book. It may not be the greatest Night of the Living Dummy book by any means. I don't think so. If you think so, respect to you, but I don't think it is after reading the sequel. But it's good for what it is. You'll have a fun time. And I think that it has creepy moments. It has a great climax. And despite its negatives, I think you will overall come out liking the book. So yeah, that's my review of it. Do I recommend it? Of course. Not only is it one of the most important Goosebumps books of all time, overall it's a good read. So I definitely recommend it. That's it for my review. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This review is a little bit longer, so I hope you guys bared with me. But because it's such an important book, I tried to make it longer. So yeah, check out some of my content on my other channel down below. I have other Goosebumps content in the playlist. And also subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed, and also comment down below your own thoughts and opinions regarding this book. And yeah, that's all I have for today. Deuces. No, really, I'm serious. This is all it would have taken, kids, all right? Use this at any costs, unless your parents are watching, in which case you never stumbled upon this video. Ever.